Welcome to the Momship Mastery podcast, the ultimate destination for moms seeking balance, connection, and growth in their journey through motherhood. I'm your host, master's level therapist and life coach, Andrea Baker. Here at the Momship Mastery, we believe that motherhood is a purposeful journey filled with discoveries, challenges, and countless opportunities, from self-care strategies to relationship building, from spiritual growth to parenting insights. I've got you covered. So, if you're ready to embark on this journey with us, hit that subscribe button and let's explore the world of motherhood, relationships, and growth together. Remember, you're not alone on this journey, and we're here to support you every step of the way. All right, so today we have Kat on with us. Hi, Kat. Can you introduce yourself to our friends today?
My name is Kat Newport. I'm a recovering executive, so I've been in the corporate world for a long time, which means, why am I here? I'm also a mother of 4 children ranging in ages from 9 years old to 28 years old. I am a conflict to growth navigator, change architect, author, and founder of Oculus Inc. I'm a certified change practitioner and coach, and my niche is conflict. I inject myself into conflict with enthusiasm and joy, which is probably a little bit strange for most folks.
No, seriously, I'm like the first question I have is just like, how did you even come into this type of work? What made you like go after conflict in that way?
So when I started my career, my conflict skills were, how do I put this? Less than stellar. How's that? So there were a lot of hard-won lessons over the years, and eventually in my corporate life, I ended up getting into organizational development and creating conflict programs for the leadership. And I found that a lot of the stuff that I was teaching them, I started teaching my children. And the difference that I started seeing in the way my children interacted with conflict was fundamentally different. And I was talking to a lot of my colleagues who I was teaching, and a lot of these habits, these conflict habits that they were having were coming from, their histories, their childhoods, how they grew up, the relationships they have, all of these kinds of things. So there were building blocks in place before they ever reached me, either in a course for how to manage conflict management in the workplace or through mediation. We have a problem and you need a little bit of help trying to pull those two sides together to a point of agreement.
Yeah, so what was the thing that you were finding, like, what's the main issue with that was coming up in conflict management, even with your children?
Conflict avoidance was huge. So people not willing to engage in conflict on any level, which did a whole bunch of things. We were seeing issues in the workplace, of course, that, I'm not willing to talk to you about an issue we're having. So the issue gets bigger and bigger until it finally explodes. So that was a challenge. We were also seeing a lot of mental health issues, burnouts, that kind of thing coming from, well, I can't deal with conflicts. Push it all deep, deep down inside and hope it goes away, which it certainly doesn't. So the solution that I started working with was empathetic assertion, and I kind of played with it, calling it the Oculus Owl. Oculus is my company's name. First, foundationally, figuring out is actually bothering you. And I know that sounds silly place to start. When you're angry and when you're in conflict, it's like, well, I'm angry and I'm in conflict, and this is what it's about, obviously. You don't. To my experience, there's usually a lot more layers to that. Well, maybe not.
Right, let's
There's
dig
probably a
deeper
few
into
other
that.
layers to that. So
Man,
figuring out what's
that's,
wrong.
yeah.
Yeah. Moving into, where do you want the relationship to be once you're finished the conflict? And no relationships, no conflict. So as long as there's no people around you, you're fine. But you really got to take a look at those relationships and figure out what you want them to look like in the end. Sometimes in conflict, we come out swinging. I just want to feel better, so I'm going to make you feel worse. But we still have this relationship we have to have after. And when we're looking at family dynamics, we're around these folks a lot. Those people, you're around a lot too. So those relationships are just as important.
Hey guys, I wanted to remind you about the Momship Mastery quiz. You can take it and find out where you are on your Momship Mastery journey. Have you taken it yet? If not, then go ahead. The link is in the show notes. With that comes a lot of bonuses, a lot of exclusives, and you are always the first to know what's happening with the Momship Mastery. So go ahead and take that quiz and let's get back into it. Yeah, so it's like you're at work, like you said, 8 or 9 hours a day. And if you have conflict in the workplace and you're avoiding that, you don't want to deal with that. And then you come home, and then, of course, there's people, so there's going to be conflict, and you don't want to deal with that either. At what point does it just comes to your door and says, no, you're going to have to deal with me?
It will. Definitely, definitely will. There'll come a break point, right? When you're just no longer willing to be in that relationship. And we see this a
Hmm.
lot. I mean, if you scroll through social media, I'll cut off this person, I won't talk to this friend anymore. It'll come to a point
Hmm.
where that tension just comes so hot that it's easier to break the relationship. Conversely, it may come to a point where it just gets so hot that, it's put on the boxing gloves, figuratively speaking, and come out
Hmm.
verbally swinging,
Right now.
not literally verbally, sparring with your partner, those yelling matches where you end up in the silent treatment for a few days. And then you've really got to work on that
Hmm.
reconciliation afterwards to rebuild the fractures in the relationship.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that because a lot of times, especially like in our culture and the media, social media, like the cutoff thing is so strong now. It seems like if anybody upsets me, I'm just going to cut them off. And it goes back to that avoidance thing. I said it all stems back to that, but I tell my clients all the time, it's like you still have to deal with you. Like you still have to deal with you. And a lot of times that external conflict deals with a lot of internal conflict, like you were saying. And it's just, it builds and it builds. And you can try to get away from everybody else, but we cannot get away from ourselves, especially when we're trying to raise these little humans. We're trying to like give them a life that they don't have to recover from, right? And we're trying to help them to build like this conflict management system in within themselves. Then we have to figure it out too. And that's just, it's like one of those things where we have so much to juggle. Like you're doing it at work, you're trying to figure it out at home.
I would agree, absolutely. It seems in the moment to be the easiest thing to do. But again, I come back to that relationship point. What do you want these relationships to look like after? And if you look at your children, what do you want that relationship with your child to look like after? If you're in
Hmm.
conflict with them about bedtime, about what to eat, and it's, go to your room until you change your mind and agree with me, what are we modeling here? What are we teaching? That you must capitulate to an authority figure. So, we carry these things. You can tell I'm a Gen Xer,
Hmm.
quit your crying or I'll give you a reason to cry.
Yes.
So, we build those things into the child's narrative and they do carry that information along.
Yeah, and it's just like, let's back up a little bit because we're using the word conflict, but what do you define conflict as? Because a lot of people have this misconstrued idea of what conflict is. They think conflict is always fighting, they think conflict is yelling and screaming, but what do you define conflict as being?
You are absolutely right. And I come smack dab into that like I'd say at least every week. I was like, no, I don't want to argue with you. We're not arguing. How I define conflict is very simple. It is simply a difference of opinion. Your perspective and my perspective don't match. That's it.
Hmm.
That's all conflict is. And most folks are really surprised when I tell them they have conflicts every day and they literally don't
Hmm.
even know it. They handle it so well and there's no emotional impact that it's literally forgotten about. When the barista gets your coffee order wrong, you go up and say, gee, my coffee order's
Hmm.
wrong. That is a conflict. And a lot of folks deal with that on a day-to-day basis, no problem. Gee, there's a spelling error
Right.
in your report. Oh yeah, let me go fix
Hmm.
that. Welcome to a conflict.
A
So
conflict, exactly.
we have them every day. Just the human brain is designed to protect you. So it remembers the really bad ones and forgets about all the rest. Say conflict, it just grabs onto those really bad ones and going, oh no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, we're dealing with conflicts all day, every day, all throughout the day. There's always something that is happening, especially in motherhood, right? Like something's always wrong. There's something you have to fix. You have to manage the disagreements within your household, with outside of your household. So, but I think we just get so afraid of like facing conflict head on. And it's like, how else are we going to get ahead of it? How else are we going to take charge of it? And I think even as women, it's kind of seen as like, well, women shouldn't be conflictual or women shouldn't be confrontational. And it's this understanding or this statement that we should have less of a voice when it comes to conflict. I like to push against that. You have a voice, and I encourage you to use that voice and to say the things that you need to say and to do those things. But how do you see that showing up in the workplace? Like, how do you see that showing up, women dealing with conflict, even if it's against someone else or a diverse population?
This one's an interesting one for me. I actually started my career and spent my almost my entire career inside a highly male-dominated industry. I am at, 20 something years old, dealing with these older gentlemen and really trying to butt up against and proactively butt up against that you must be a good girl mentality. You
Mm-hmm.
must be quiet, you must capitulate, be seen and not heard. Nice girls don't do that. And it took me a long time, and I'm hoping that my messaging in my book helps women really develop that a lot quicker than I did. The lessons learned. It took me a long time to realize that it is a social construct. It is everybody
Mm-hmm.
trying to put me in a box, and that I'm okay with not being a good girl. I'm
Mm-hmm.
okay with speaking my mind in a respectful way, and I'm okay with the labels that society's going to put on that. I'm
Yeah.
going to be okay with that you're not nice, you're very manly, you're, all of these things that people automatically assume when you present yourself as a strong and confident female. Just a story to segue here is I was pregnant with my fourth child at work,
Mm-hmm.
and I had shown up at a remote location, and someone looked at me. He's like, "Oh, you must be really excited about having your child. This is your first." And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
"No, this is my fourth." It's like, "Oh my gosh, you're a mother?" Like, I can't be
Wow.
strong and powerful and a mother at the
Mm-hmm.
same time. It was actually an interesting paradigm, and this was coming from another woman. So it
Wow.
so these messages we're getting within our society of what a woman is
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be, and for those of you who are listening, I have lots of air quotes going on right now. It's supposed to be, you have to find what resonates with yourself, and that takes a lot of bravery,
Mm-hmm.
uh, to
Yeah,
to break
yeah.
that.
And to have it like there's a part of us that expects it from other men and things like that, but to have it come from a woman, that it's like as much as we have to kind of face off and face against the world, we don't expect to have to explain our position and our stance to another woman who, should to some extent have more grace or compassion for us as women. And it's just, we all have our own ways we're going to approach motherhood, we're going to approach work. And a lot of people still have that issue of, well, you can't be type of working mom and not, not be neglecting your home or your kids. What do you think? Like, how did you respond to those types of notions? Because I know you were, like you said, you were senior leadership. How did you balance that within yourself, but also with people consistently coming and questioning like your ability to do both?
I was very privileged for a lot of my career. My husband was a stay-at-home dad. So there was a lot of opportunity for me to pursue a hard-hitting career with someone at home. That said, there was still that balance. And I don't know if it's a shame piece, but I wasn't always really great at balancing the two of them.
Hmm.
So I think closer to the end of my career, that balance started to come, my corporate career, because I'm obviously still working. That balance really started to come through, that my priorities definitely changed. I really have to take a look at what I need to focus on and what my future
Hmm.
looks like. It became a reorientation to what relationships were actually fundamentally important to me. And again, I encourage yourself and your listeners to really look at that before you hit middle age.
I appreciate that perspectives because a lot of times we wish I had known this sooner. So I really admire and honor your experience of saying, hey, learn this before you hit this spot. It's definitely something that I think we should constantly be looking at and constantly be trying to make sure we understand within ourselves. So I know you said you left corporate and then you went into entrepreneurship. How was that transition in the frame of what types of conflicts did you have to endure to make that transition?
So there was a lot of internal conflict with that one. I found
Mm,
my corporate identity was very heavy. I had worked a long time in the field, becoming a subject matter expert, walking into a room and everybody goes, "Oh, there's Kat." And then
mm-hmm.
moving into an entrepreneurial field where I walk into a room and nobody knows who I am. Okay, so I've got to show up differently. I've got to be here
Uh-huh.
differently. I've got to present myself differently, these kinds of things. So there was definitely a rearranging of that
Mm-hmm.
self-perception and a rearranging of how I interact with the world. So if we're looking at conflict from an internal perspective, that one's still in progress.
I think that internal conflict is never going to go away.
No, there's
Not
always
fully.
decisions to be made. Always decisions to be from an external conflict side of the house. Um, what I was experiencing was more from an outsider's perspective inwards. So it wasn't me sort of conflicting
Mm-hmm.
with the world. It was the world sort of trying to reorient itself to me,
Mm-hmm.
coming to friends who I'd had for a long time going, "Are you crazy? Do you know how
Mm-hmm.
hard it is to be an entrepreneur?" No, I had no idea. I just
Mm-hmm.
decided to jump into it one day. Of course I know. So there was that redefinition of relationships that had to take place. And quite flat out, I have lost relationships. I have lost friendships. I've
Yeah.
lost acquaintances who no longer orient themselves. Well, you obviously, are moving on with your life and, we don't match anymore since
Mm-hmm.
you're not in corporate and you don't have high power and, this kind of
Yeah.
thing. That said, I've gained a lot of relationships as well. As I
Mm-hmm.
reoriented into different groups, I came to build those relationships and on that reciprocal level that, this is who I am and this is what I do. And it's like, okay, you see me,
Mm-hmm.
I see you. And it developed. So, there was that external conflict of what relationships are now ending, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Relationships are not necessarily here for life. What relationships are starting, and then managing those as you move forward.
That's so important because I think that's another fear that we have is just like facing the fact that this conflict could result in these relationships ending. This conflict could result in us not having the same comfort that we had before. And if we stay in that space of, I'm too afraid to see what's on the other side of that. Like you said, you met new people, you made new relationships. But if you never get past that point of, these have been my friends for this amount of time, or these have been the people that I've depended on. This is the life that we lived for so long. That's the growth part of going through conflict. I just see conflict as like it's something wrong on the other side of this, but we have to figure it out to get to the other side of that. And it's like, but we can't avoid it. And I'm talking to myself, I guess, because like, you can't avoid it. Like you really do. You can't allow that fear of the conflict or the loss to dictate whether or not you're able to manage or navigate that space. So I hope that is a helpful nugget to a lot of people because it's helping me. While I sit with that, are there any really specific conflict management skills that you find yourself demonstrating on a day-to-day or that you find yourself reiterating to your children throughout the days or throughout their lives or the conflicts they may be facing?
Very much so. There's sort of a five-finger five-finger punch for conflict. And as my concept of conflict has grown, my ability to teach that to my children has grown. And the way my firstborn, my 28-year-old, deals with conflict versus my lastborn, my 9-year-old, deals with conflict is night and day.
Mm.
So as terrible as this may sound, the experimentation on my children is going well. I grow, they grow, everybody's
It's
growing.
the truth.
So the first one is understand the situation. The second one is emotional regulation. Measure
Mhm.
the emotions you're coming in with. A lot of conflict, as I've said, we want to feel better, just want to feel better right now. And we come in with that emotional space.
Mhm.
Emotions are like pain. They're telling you something needs attention. And it's how you act on that in a conflict. What kind of attention are you going to give it? When you are going into a conflict, make sure you have an idea on where you want to end up. Have an agenda and not a bad agenda. I've got an agenda that
Mhm.
I'm running. You're actually sharing with your conflict conversation partner. I really would like to see this come out X way. I want to see it like
Mhm.
this in the end. And
Yeah.
then negotiating from there. Know what you want that relationship to look like on the other side of your conflict. And finally, pick the right time and place. in the middle of the mall, screaming at one another might not be the best opportunity to have a conflict. Right before bed with your spouse, when you're both tired and cranky from a long day at work, might not be the best time to have a conflict. I think don't go to bed angry has ended more marriages than it has saved.
Right. It's like we have
So
to hash this out right now.
no matter what emotional state or mental state you're in, we are going to deal with this right now. So pick the right time and place for it. Smart conflict, situation, measure the emotions, have an agenda, make sure your relationship is thought out, and pick that right time and place.
I like that. That's pretty witty. So it's easy to remember. You just have the SMART acronym, and we'll make sure we put that in the notes so our guests and our listeners can make sure they kind of keep that rolling around. You talked a bit about managing like and really visualizing what you want that to look like. What do you want the relationship to look like? What do you want it to look like after the conflict? Because I don't think we often think about that. Like I know for me, in the beginning of my marriage, I was very much so I need to win this conflict or nobody sleeps. I had to realize like what I wanted at the end of it, and that was for us to have a happy marriage, for us to have a happy household. But sometimes we get so caught up, no, they have to see it my way, and that part of it to the point we could really damage what we want to see. Like we could damage it to the point where we don't remember that person, the feeling of admiration and compassion. Is like we kind of throw that out the window and we're like, no, it's all about me winning this argument. So how, like within relationships, have you found yourself navigating that part of I need them to see where I'm coming from versus maybe this isn't the time, or maybe this is one of those moments we just have to agree to disagree and figure out how we're going to work that out?
So there's a lot there to unpack. I think the first thing I want to say is that if you're going into a conflict saying, I have to win at all costs, you have already lost. Because conflict's about relationships. It's not about winning and losing. It's about relationships, period. So if you've got that mentality, start playing with that a little bit. So that's one thing that I definitely want to put forward. One of the things that I ascribe to, and one of the things that you'd read in the book is empathetic conflict. Coming into a conflict with judgment or bias or a win-lose mentality, you're coming in from a self-centric perspective, which when we're dealing with relationships, particularly with our children or our spouses, it can be a huge challenge. Acting with empathy requires active listening. You have to listen as much as you speak. I heard this once that the universe gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Listen twice as much as you speak. It requires that perspective thing. Where are they coming from? Where do we agree? Where can we say, yeah, these points were good and these 2 points were not so good. We've got to negotiate a way forward with these. And I see this come up in a corporate environment where it's my way or the highway. We're going to do it my way. And this stifles innovation in a workplace. And when you're building a life with an individual, if it's your way or the highway, you're all living your life. You married someone, you partnered with someone to forge a life together, and you're not able to do that if you're not listening to where they want to go to.
Yes, definitely listening to where they want to go to, because we can get in our minds that, you know, this is the vision that I have, this is the vision that I want. And if we don't communicate those things, if we don't have a safe space where we can sit there and talk about it without feeling like you're defending, it's just really hard to get that clarity and get that solid foundation to build up on. And this is when I think conflict just becomes unmanageable because you don't have anything to build it up on. You're just kind of throwing it at the wall and trying to see what happened. But it's very important to have that shared communication and like the active listening to know who you're talking to, what are their desires, what are they wanting. Like oftentimes with clients, I'll say, what did you hear them say? Let me see what you heard, because sometimes we hear something that's completely different than what they said. So often going back to asking, you know, I heard you say this. Is that right? Sometimes we didn't hear it correctly, and that like levels a lot of time or alleviates some conflicts. But we know that conflicts are a part of life, and there's never going to not be conflict. So how do we live a life knowing that every day is going to be a conflict? There's going to be something. How do you live that type of life and still like have a good quality of life?
Reframe what you think conflict is. We mentioned this earlier in the podcast that a lot of folks think that conflict is the knockdown, drag 'em out, verbal sparring, must win at all costs, emotionally, will make me feel terrible for days and days, when it's not. One of the things I really like to put in front of folks is that conflict equals creativity. Without conflict, there is no creativity, there is no innovation, there is no next level. So reframing what we think of conflict takes the emotional sting out of it, takes some of that anxiousness out of it, rewires the brain a little bit. So we're talking neuroplasticity here. Rewires the brain a little bit so you can engage with it more positively. And once we take that anxiousness out of it, it makes it so much easier to deal with.
Yeah, definitely. Reframing. I love that because it's all about our perspective and how we see things. And that really sets the tone and the direction of where we're going. So the last thing I want to talk to you about conflict is repairing after conflict. So let's say it may have been I had to put the gloves on and boxing it out. We've gone there, right? Or maybe this conflict ended in tears, or it just was very highly emotional and it requires a repair afterwards. How do you repair after the conflict? What's your advice?
There are definitely those 3 phases. There's, before the conflict, during the conflict, and after the conflict. So we're talking about reconciliation here. After the conflict has happened, it's important to take a look at what happened and take ownership of it. There is no one without some sort of culpability, things that we could have done better, things that we might not have said or may say differently in the future. So there's that self-reflection piece on what could I do better and what is my responsibility in this. And then there's the art of the apology. This is what I regret. I will try to do better in the future. And then an apology is only as good as the actions that back it up. Making sure that you're trying to change the behavior after the conflict to something that aligns more with who you want to be. You're noticing I'm keeping the other person pretty much out of this, and that's quite for a reason.
Right.
How you show up in the relationship is what you can control. It's the only person on this planet that's it. And for those of us with children, it's certainly not them. The only person you can control is yourself.
Your reactions. That's
Exactly. So take a look at your actions. Start communicating in a positive way. When you said this to me in this tone, it made me feel like this. In the future, could you try saying it like this instead? Start setting those boundaries of how you want the other person to interact with you. Some boundaries are chain link fence, and some of them are giant concrete walls topped with barbed wire. But start figuring out what those boundaries are. If we start feeling like, well, they took advantage of me and they did this to me and I didn't want them to do this to me, obviously we haven't taken as much time as we need to communicate those boundaries and set those boundaries up so that they're clearly understood by others. So there's a little bit of boundary work in there as well.
This has been such a fun conversation. It's really like I could talk about this all day. I didn't realize I was so into conflict. I was like, man, this is really fun. It just brings about so many questions. And I know there's so many layers to this that people are going to have questions and thoughts about. So how can people find you if they have questions about conflict? How can they learn more about what you know about conflict?
Easiest place to go is my website. So smartconflictbook.com. It has all the things on conflict, free training. So 30-minute trainings. One of them's the art of the apology. I made reference to that earlier. So you can get all of that information for free on the website and find out more.
Okay. I'm so excited that we got to have this conversation. It's been so fun. I know that this is going to be so beneficial to the audience that have conflicts because everybody does. Thank you so much for just giving us your time and your expertise. We appreciate you coming on to the Momship Mastery podcast today.
Thank you so much. It was an honor to be here.
That's all for today, and I hope that you're feeling inspired to navigate your shifts with grace and authenticity. If you enjoyed this episode, I want you to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a mom who may just need a little support and encouragement. Don't forget to connect with us on social media. We are on Instagram and Facebook at Momship Mastery, and those links are also in the show notes. Before we go, here's my little reminder. You are an incredible mom, and you have the power to nurture your inner well-being and create meaningful connections and relationships. Embrace the journey, cherish the moments, and continue to thrive in your momship journey. Until next time.